Good afternoon, everyone. We are so glad to have you with us today for What Students Need to Know, GED, RLA's Extended Response. We're so glad to have each of you with us today, and we hope that you'll be able to take from this some really good information that you can take back into the classroom. Today online we have Daphne Atkinson and Debbie Fawcett from the GED Testing Service, as well as Bonnie Goonan is with me as a consultant, and I'm Susan Pittman, in case you don't recognize the Southern accent. Today's objectives are pretty straightforward. We're going to do an overview. This is not what you call a deep dive into a specific thing, but we're looking at an overview for the performance expectations for constructed response items and then scoring those. We're going to explore the teaching of key aspects of the constructed response, and we're going to look at a structured approach to tackling this writing task. Along with that, we're going to share some resources as well as we're going through. And what you need to know at this point is that a lot of this information has been gathered as a result of some pretty heavy-duty research that has been going on. You know, we're constantly looking at what are we doing, what are our students doing, how can we make sure that they are successful test takers, and especially as we come into this. So I'm going to briefly just start out with a few things, and then I'm going to turn it over to my colleagues here as we continue on through this presentation. But just a couple of little side items that I'd like for you to be aware of. On the right-hand side of your screen, you should see a dashboard. It's a control panel that you will find there. And within that, there are a couple of different things you should be aware of. There is an element there that says questions. And if you have a question during this presentation, please feel free to just type it into the question box, and we will be glad to answer those questions. Some questions we hold toward the end, but other questions we will do as we're continuing on through the presentation. At this point, all of you are muted, and that's really to keep that background noise down so that we don't have a lot of that, because right now we have over 300 people on this particular webinar. We're pleased to have that many people here today. And also, there's another area here. It's called handouts, and you'll see that there are two of them there. One is the PowerPoint, the other one is a resource guide, and you can on your computer go ahead and download those if you want to, or these things will be available when this is posted online on the GED Testing Service website. So it's not like you're not going to ever be able to access these materials, but you will be able to go back to those if you're not able to download those handouts at this particular point in time. But as I said, please, we want your questions. We want to know your concerns. So don't be shy in asking questions as we go through. And so now what I'd like to do, just briefly, is talk just a little bit about some things that we already know. Why constructed response? Well, we know that a constructed response is the best way of really assessing our students' writing and their reading skills, as well as those higher order thinking skills that we know they need not just for a test, but as they go forward in whatever is going to be the next step for them. We know that RLA, the extended response, is 45 minutes is allocated for that, and it's about 20% of the test, and that's in terms of that raw score points. And here's a really interesting and important thing for us. It is possible to pass without earning score points, but we know that's not good test strategy. We know that our students need these writing skills, and so we really don't want a student to say, I'm just not going to do this. So you keep those things in mind as we're going through some really basic information. Now, let me talk just a little bit about a couple of things, and we call them the urban legends that you hear out there, and a lot of people hear these. So we want to try to put these things to rest. And the first one out the box, of course, is, oh, if you use the word I, you're automatically going to earn a 0. No, that is not the case. We have students who they slip up and they may have an I in there, and it's not an automatic 0. However, we also know that this is a more formal style of writing and that we need to stay away from that. And the other thing is that, you know, we have a lot of students who are earning 0s. So how are we going to deal with that? I mean, maybe that scoring engine's just not working right. Yes, it is working right. And so we want to make sure that students are aware that, yes, it is working, but we need to make sure that the students are working correctly toward what they need as a response. And the next thing, show us some real student responses. We do have real student responses, and those are provided on the GED Testing Service website, and we'll refer to those again as we go through. But they're things that you, as an instructor, and your students as well, need to be aware of. Now, there's another one here about, we hear it from many places, well, students just don't have enough time. Sadly, students aren't using the time that they have. Just recently I was talking with Daphne, who is online with us here, and she was talking about how we still have students who they're barely spending more than half of the time working through this. So we need to make sure that our students are taking advantage of the 45 minutes that they have. Already said it once, skipping that extended response, it's not a good test strategy. Some students may say otherwise, but no, we don't want that to happen. And then a couple more. No one earns any points. Yes, students do earn points. In fact, you know, what really impresses me as I look out there is I'm seeing so many students who are scoring in those higher ranges, and we haven't even been pushing that issue. Those students are earning points. That's what we see. And then you have to game the system. So you got to use certain keywords and phrases. No, that's not how the scoring engine works. So, you know, students who are concerned that if I don't say something just a specific way, I'm not going to get any points. Again, the 45 minutes isn't enough time. I really wish, and I know Bonnie, Debbie, Daphne, they all agree with me, that students would take the full 45 minutes to read, to plan, and to write. Two other little quick things. The instructions don't tell you what you have to do. Well, students just aren't looking at the instructions, and I think we can make a concerted effort to really make sure students are seeing those. And we'll talk about some ways we can do that. And then, of course, the one that I often encounter as I'm out there, and I'm sure that many of you, too, hear it from your students, there has to be a right answer. There's one of those positions I'm supposed to pick, and if I do, then I'll get more points. The evidence is available in both of them. Either one of those responses, those positions can be taken. So there are a couple of things that we need to take on in all this. And Bonnie, I'm going to ask you if you can talk a little bit about what is it that is effective if they're trying to take on that extended response.
Well, you know, there's a number of things that our students can do to be more effective as they start tackling this wonderful thing called an extended response. First of all, they have to be able to apply critical thinking and reasoning skills. Those are those higher order thinking skills that we have to be teaching our students in the classroom every day. And if they have those skills, they can also then use those closed reading skills more effectively. We need to always remember that constructive response requires both integrated reading and writing skills. And of course, our test takers really have to understand what's being asked and what's being expected. And they need to get that from each of us as we teach in the classroom. There are no secrets about what students are supposed to produce, what types of writing, as well as what is text and evidence-based. And they also have to have a sufficient understanding of that task prior to taking the operational tests, as well as being familiar with the test interface and those basic keyboarding skills that they have to have. Taking the operational test, sitting right there on that day, is not the day that they figure out that they don't know what the prompt is asking, they don't know what the test interface looks like, and oh my goodness, they didn't realize that they didn't have some basic keyboarding skills. We also know that's some real basics. That text-based writing requires a few things. It definitely requires proficient reading skills at a minimum. And what we hope is that students are able to have better, close reading skills. We also know that there's a couple words out there that students need to be able to do. They have to organize their thinking process so they can analyze and evaluate. Notice the S word is missing, that word called summarizing. And we're going to talk more about summarizing versus analyzing and evaluating in just a little bit. But they also have to recognize and write about evidence. And we all know evidence is more than just facts and statistics. There are a lot of other types of evidence that our students need to know about. But even more importantly, they have to have a routine that is so integrated that when they sit down to write, they know that step-by-step process. It is a part of them. And I think this is sometimes the most difficult thing because they have to have enough practice. Depending upon what research you use, we're told that we have to be able to do tasks a minimum of 12 to 15 times before they really internalize within us. And so if we have not had enough practice, our students are going to sit down and have that extended response task, and they forget even the first step of what they should do. Don't worry about all the other tests. So as we look at the effectiveness of the writing skills, how do we look at them? Well, constructive response has those three basic traits, and our students need to have those also internalized. They need to understand how to use evidence. We're going to keep using that word evidence throughout, because if they know how to set up their argument and use evidence and connecting pieces to support it, then they have a really big part of extended response nailed. But they also have to have ideas and an organizational structure. How do they express meaning? As well as, of course, we always want them to be able to review what they've written so that grammar and sentence structure are correct. So when they're responding to the prompt, it says they need to be able to analyze both positions presented, determine which one is better supported. And as Susan told you earlier, there is not a, quote, right or wrong answer. They can take either side, but they must use relevant and specific evidence to support their response. So again, those three traits, all of our students need to know that that is what argumentative writing is based upon, and that's how their writing samples are going to be scored. When we take a look at what extended responses require of our students, there's a whole lot of skills. And those skills are all integrated. You just keep hearing me say that word. It is an integrated task because it's more than just closely reading, although that's a big part of it. They also have to determine what is said and draw comparisons between two different texts. Then they also have to go ahead and take a look at that evidence and determine whether the evidence supports a valid argument or whether there's faulty reasoning. They also have to determine whether a claim is supported or unsupported, and of course they have to make inferences that are based upon the evidence. It's not going to say in that reading sample that this side is supported because. They're going to have to be able to draw that evidence from the text and determine that it is relevant and sufficient enough in order to make sure that it supports whatever claim is being made. GED Testing Service has done a lot of work with test takers, looking at how they're doing and why. In fact, there's a lot of longitudinal research that continues to take place by GED Testing Service. So, why are students struggling so much? What really is happening? Daphne, can you share with us a little bit of why our students are struggling on the extended response?
I sure can, Bonnie. One of the things that we've done a series of what our colleagues in assessment services call cognitive labs. And what that simply means is that there's a researcher at the student's elbow watching them interface with the platform and the question. And one of the things that struck them early on in observing students is that students did not use an outline or a plan from which to write. And better yet, they didn't demonstrate a particularly structured approach to the task. And those two things, which I think many of you in our audience today have heard students say that, you know, well, you want me to write? Well, I'm just going to start writing. But that is not the way to actually create a piece of writing that ends up earning points. The third thing that was stuck out in the research that we did is that students were not writing enough to be scored. You know, you can't read between the lines, but so much. And certainly the guidelines that we published, 300 to 500 words to sufficiently answer the prompt, should give you an indication that it's really tough to be able to answer the demands of the prompt in 100 words or less. And Bonnie already and Susan both have already mentioned the fact that of the 45 minutes available, students are not using that time, yet many firmly believe that there's not enough time to do everything that needs to be done. On average, they're using 25 of the 45 minutes. And we would seriously like to see that change because we also believe it could impact student performance significantly if they had a better sense of how to optimize their use of the time. So what are we talking about in terms of the skills gap? You know, the biggest thing that stands out from the research is, you know, the deficit in reasoning skills, and that's both qualitative and quantitative. All our favorite words are here, analysis of written material, and that means that students have to perceive written material as being more than simply words on a page. The second point, I think Bonnie's already made a great, you know, a great set of comments about evidence, that students have a fairly narrow view when they were questioned by the researchers of what constitutes evidence. And if there aren't numbers, i.e. statistics, or reports cited, they tend to overlook the other 4 or 5 types of evidence that might be used by a writer to support an argument. And so from there, you make the, you know, necessary transition to the ability to draw logical inferences. And I think many of you have told all of us who've been in the field doing training that you believe, and I think you are correct in this, that students are afraid of inferencing simply because they don't want to be wrong. You know, what if I am wrong? But that is a skill gap as well. And the last piece is what we call connecting the dots. It's a little bit of a poetic statement, but it literally means understanding the relationship between and among things like people, places, things, processes, and events. And that naturally leads into the ability to analyze cause and effect relationships, both simple and complex. So Bonnie, what's the difference between struggling writers and successful writers? Bonnie?
Well, I think that Bonnie, Daphne, this is Susan. I think Bonnie is working with her headset just a little bit. We had some people who were talking about a little bit of echo that was coming through. So I'll take this one on while Bonnie is dealing with that.
And
so,
I am back.
Oh, okay. Well, then I will let you have it then. Okay.
Okay, as we look through struggling to successful writers, and you have this in your workbook, but we do see a lot of things here where students who are planning and they are successful, they analyze the task first, and then they understand all of the elements, creating their own goals for their writing. We also know that successful writers do develop plans, and they discuss how and why that plan's going to work. That's a lot of things for a successful writer to do. And as we said before, successful writers need to just have a plan in place, so they automatically do this all the time. As they organize, they develop their ideas and organize their writing, and they have a process to use. And again, when they're using the plan, they start as they draft and write to generate sentences that support those ideas. And they know what the essay should look like, so they understand the elements. And finally, all effective and successful writers make sure that they edit and revise before they hand it in. So let's look at a few insights that can improve student performance. And so that way we're going to have a little bit better idea of what, as instructors, we need to do. So, what earns points for our students? We want them to do more than a scorable 0. We'd like to see them have at least 1 point here and there, and hopefully a whole lot more. But as we look at what earns points, first of all, we know that students need to go beyond just stating which side is best supported. In fact, what they have to do is they need to tell us why. Why is it supported? We also know that effective writers, in order to get points, need to do more than just using quotations.
Hello?
They have to be able to cite evidence so that they support the overall
Bonnie?
message. They cannot just summarize.
Bonnie, I'm going to have you stop for just a moment. We have some people on the background that are talking, and so if it happens to be an organizer, we need to make sure that they're muted. So that information doesn't come in, because I'm not real sure that when you got to the part about quotations that people were actually able to hear you.
And this is Tico. I still hear some echoing as well. I wanted to let you know that.
Okay, thank you, Tico. I appreciate that. We are aware that we have some echoing that is coming in, and we're trying to work within that to make some changes. We do apologize for that as we're going through. So, Bonnie, you want to pick up just a little bit about more than just...
I sure will.
Okay.
Okay. Let's go ahead and start on this slide once more so that we know everybody is with us. What earns points is if our students go beyond merely stating which side is best supported. In fact, if they say, this side is best supported, and that's it. That's not enough to earn points. Our students, our test takers, need to include the why. One side was better supported than the other. And we'll show you what that looks like in just a moment. The other thing is we need test takers to do more than just using quotations. or a summarization of what has been said. Evidence that they cite has to support that overall message, and they must analyze it in some way. That's the connection piece. So there are a number of things that we know students can do, test takers can do to get more points. But if you're like Susan and me, I need to see what that looks like. So Susan, let's see what that looks like in the aspect of setting a claim.
Okay, and
what would we want our test takers to do?
What I'm going to do very quickly, because I do know that we're picking up some echo here. Take a look, folks, at the slide that you have in front of you, and I want you to just take a look at the top and notice that we're setting a claim. And Bonnie made a comment just a minute ago about the importance of the why. That we can't just say, they say daylight savings time is a great thing. That just leaves you wondering, okay, what's next? Take a look where it says this. Between the two positions in this article, the one against daylight savings time is better supported. And there's that neat little word, because. So it's giving the reader an understanding of reasons behind that particular claim, and in this case, because of the stronger research used. I think what happens here with this particular slide, as Bonnie and Daphne were putting together different information, that what you see here is just that little extension that our students need to be aware of the difference between the two, and maybe even discuss why this looks better than another one does. So those are the kinds of things that I think make it much clearer for us as we're moving through. Just that simple addition of because and a reason for that makes a huge difference. Yes, Daphne?
And Susan, that because also sets a roadmap in motion for where you're going to go with the writing.
Absolutely. And in fact, if you think about it, you know, as a reader, if I were looking at this particular claim, I would say, okay, now the next things I should be seeing are some things about that deal with the research. So those are things that make our students have much clearer writing as they're going through, and think of the value of that beyond the GED test, but actually as they move out into, quote, the real world, whether it's post-secondary or going into work. It can make a big difference in being able to explain themselves and support what they have to say in writing. Now, what else earns points? And so, Bonnie, I'm going to come back to you and take a look at, if you can talk just a little bit about why this analysis is so important.
Well, first of all, analysis is indeed the part that is a higher order thinking skill. And so what earns points is if a test taker can analyze the issue or the quality of the argument, and can they provide evidence that, again, is supportive of the overall message, and then is analyzed in some way. So what earns points is that test taker must engage with the text and demonstrate that he or she has created that text-based argument, again, that's supported with analyzed evidence, which connects back to the claim. Oh my goodness, that really sounds a little bit confusing. So let's look at what that looks like.
Now again, folks, if you will just take a look at the differences between these two and what you're seeing within these, where on the left-hand side, you see that that student has clearly not just analyzed, but evaluated and is actually engaged with that text. So I'll give you a minute here to read those two. Notice how in this first one, it says it's connecting into those different articles and making an explanation about what those articles have said. Now, it's not summarizing those, but it has brought forward different points within that article. Likewise, showing what the difference is between what happened in the first article versus the second. So there has clearly been that evaluation between those two. As we look at what many of our students are doing, what we see as they're working through this is they're just rambling through about different things that happen to people at different times after daylight savings time changes. There's really no connection here back to the actual articles, but more information that a student might already have. So those are the things that we have to be really cautious that the student is actually responding to the text, not to their thoughts about whatever that particular topic may be. And then the other thing that comes in, and this one we see across the board, and Bonnie has received a number of different responses from teachers, so have I, and looking at things to say, what is it my student's not doing? Or why is it that they're not doing as well as they should be? And what we often see within these is we see a summary where they've summarized one passage, they summarize the next passage, or they just get into a lot of personal information. And this can be really tricky because if they do that, there's a very good likelihood they're going to flip over into an opinion piece. It doesn't take much. Now, granted, you put one I in there, you're not going to automatically get a 0. Remember our urban legend. But at the same time, if you get so pulled into the personal information, it can be a problem. So take a look at these two. The first, obviously, a summarization. The second, personal information. These are things that we want to make sure that our students move away from. Remember, going back to analyze, evaluate, engage. Summarization doesn't do that, nor does pulling in the personal information as they're working through. So I think, Bonnie, one of those urban legends said something about, well, students just don't know what to expect on this test and what to expect from an effective constructed response. And no, that's not correct. There are a number of different resources that are out there that clearly define what the expectations are for an effective constructed response. And in a few minutes, we'll go over to our resource guide so you can see a page that you could hand out to your students. And Daphne, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think there is a poster that teachers can get for their classrooms.
Yes, there is. It is among the 3 materials that we offer on the website, and it actually summarizes all the important things that students need to internalize about constructive response from, what do you need to do? What's a very simple high-level process you can use? What's the expectation for the number of words? What are these expectations in terms of what do the instructions mean? So I would argue that every language arts classroom should have this poster hanging in it as a reminder to students of what to do when you are learning to construct an effective constructive response.
Absolutely. And so if you don't have one of those, make sure that you're checking around and you're checking with the GED testing service about getting some of those posters. But a couple of other things that I think are important here. Simple techniques to improve scores. Students need to write a complete response. That's something that Daphne brought up a little while ago, and Bonnie has talked about that as well. It's not just a little short paragraph. This should be, if you think in terms of the number of words, somewhere 300 to 500 words. Now, please, we don't want students out there counting words, but we know they can't respond adequately to this prompt in a little short paragraph. Back again to that little word, why. They have to do that commentary there on the evidence that they're citing. Explain the why. We often talk about the fact that students need 2 or 3 ideas that they develop. They don't have to go into every piece of evidence that may be provided within a passage. Take 2 or 3 and fully develop those. And then also, and we see this many times, leave a little time at the end for proofreading. Well, according to what Daphne said a few minutes ago, students would have a lot of time for proofreading if they're only taking 25 minutes or so at this point to do their writing. That leaves adequate time to do some proofreading. So there's a number of different things that we can do with our students to make things, make sure that they're being more successful on this. But Bonnie, I'm going to come back to you because there's stuff we need to teach. And so if you could talk a little bit about that and about some structure that they could use.
Remember that we talked earlier that it really is important that we teach our students a routine so that they are able to sit at the test and really know how to get started. So the first thing is that they do need to learn how to write about what they have read, and that requires lots of practice. But probably the more important thing is that they have a plan, that they have a step-by-step process to not only identify the information, the evidence, determine which is the strongest and why, and then that they're able to organize that information before they actually start writing. And again, it really is a step-by-step process. The other thing is, of course, they have to be able to bring good grammar to that writing task, as well as effective sentence structure. And the very first thing, as well as the last thing, is they need to look back and make sure that they have answered the question that is being asked. The question asked, always that they determine which position is better supported and basically why. So that is what they need to answer. And we all know that the structure for a constructed response is no different than the structure for effective writing. There has to be a beginning, a middle, and an end. And as Anna asked, does that beginning, middle, and end have to equate to 300 or more words to get better than a 0? No, not necessarily, but it does need to be adequate to effectively answer the prompt. It's all about those 3 traits. So again, that beginning is the introduction. It's that thesis statement or claim, and it may restate that question to set the stage. The middle not only answers the question, but provides that important information. When Susan and I have worked with different groups, remember, as we go through items, we talk about where is the strong evidence, because the prompt says multiple pieces. How many are multiple pieces? Well, at least 2, but better for students to effectively work on that evidence, defining what it is, why it's important, and connecting it back to the claim. That's all the middle section, including, of course, the counterclaim. And then finally, that closing that summarizes the position. It restates the claim. And if students can use that structure, if they know that that is the structure that's effective, then they're going to do a much better job in writing on the constructive response prompt. So, what does that mean for you as an instructor? What is the instructional strategy to teach analyzing and evaluating? Well, the first thing is to make sure that you teach students how to interact with text. We all know that the skill of analyzing text does not just happen. We must be able to model for students how we interact with text, have them work with us in interacting with text before they are ever able to interact positively and accurately with the text on their own. And here again, as we model for our students, we need to make sure that we show them the difference between analyzing and summarizing. We need to ask ourselves questions as we read. And this provides you a few sample questions as you're modeling, analyzing a text, as you're looking at the purpose and context of what you're reading, as you're looking at who the author is and why this person would be qualified to write about a topic. Also, who the audience is. Is this person writing a letter to the editor? Is the audience the readers of newspapers? Or is the audience parents, children? I mean, who's the audience? And again, what type of evidence is provided? In previous workshops, we've talked about all the different types of evidence, and it's important as we model for students that we also identify more than just the facts and the statistics. Is there, evidence that it's the professional who's providing it? Is there emotions, emotional evidence, all kinds of things that are provided for both sides of the argument? And again, what's the organizational style? What's the structure? What's the tone? All the types of questions that we should be asking ourselves as we read, and that we have students see that we're asking those types of questions. And that's analyzing, but there's more. It's also, the prompt is asking our students to evaluate, to make a judgment call, to analyze the purpose of the argument, and to recognize the claim and how it's expressed by each of the writers or by both of the sides, and to evaluate that evidence. Is it reliable? Does it provide support for the argument? Those are all skills that our students have to have, and they have to be automatic for them. So when they sit down to read an article they've never read before on the test, they know how to analyze and evaluate from the get-go. But Susan, we wrote earlier about the fact that there are different writing samples so that all of us can see what scores the GED TS would give certain writing samples, and that we as instructors can determine why each of those three traits was scored a 0, 1, and a 2. Do we have samples of that?
Well, we have several samples. In fact, we have 2 books of samples. There are samples on the website that are included for the response that deals with taxation. There are also samples that were included for that dearly beloved daylight savings time. And so you can go out to the GED Testing Service website and go under the resources, that's classroom resources, and you can find all of those materials there. But, just taking one, for example, can make a big difference for students, because we can actually set this aside with the prompt and say, okay, how does this really come up to what the prompt has asked me to do? And so that students can see what's been produced. Now, granted, you may have a student who looks at something like the prompt, the response we have there, and say, well, I can't write that much. Well, maybe not. But at the same time, there are some key elements that are included in that go back to what the traits are. What is it that is being looked for? What is it that's being assessed as we're going through? And so this information, you have a lot of information within your resource guide as well. But keep in mind that this clearly shows that there's been an analysis and an evaluation that's been done of the text that's been provided. And one thing we have to keep in mind is that you really need to know that data. You need to know that evidence up front so that then you can make your claim. And that claim looks at this, while both sides make an acceptable case, the letter provides a better supported argument. So there has been given a reason for why this has been done. And if you go through a little bit more into it, it says the latter provides a stronger argument because, we're back to that key word again, it provides more factual evidence. Now I'm going to be looking for all that factual evidence as I go through. And then as we look through different things, we begin to find pieces of evidence that it's included within this. Students need to see how this works. And also, in this particular one, there is a counterclaim that says oh, well, the press release did offer this, but this is how they rebutted it. So, I think students have to be aware of what good writing looks like. What does the writing look like that earns points, so that they then can go ahead and work within that. And as we said, on the GED Testing Service website, there are a number of different, the 2 different prompts, the daylight savings time as well as the taxation, and then you have responses for each of those with annotations that explain each of the others. So,
Susan, before we go on, a question was asked whether the counterclaim and the rebuttal should be a separate paragraph or taught that way. And no, counterclaims and rebuttals can appear anywhere. If your students are more comfortable putting it in a separate paragraph, it is not incorrect, but just realize that counterclaims can go anywhere, although generally speaking, they appear towards the end of a writing sample. So whatever is easiest. Again, if a student is making or putting forth some evidence and there really is clearly a counterclaim to that, it's a nice way to put it into the same paragraph. However, putting it as a separate paragraph, again, if it's easier for the students to do, is also correct. So either one works.
That's a really good point, because some of those types of things can throw a student off if they don't have a way and a structure in which to work. And so if the student does have that structure where that counterclaim is set aside separately, then that's just fine. The main thing is we want our students to be able to even do a counterclaim. That's a major step forward for our students as they're working through. And, as we move into this last part of the presentation here, and we do have quite a few questions, I know, that are sitting in the question box itself. But we come back to this E word, evidence. This is what drives everything. And what we keep in mind, and for many of you who've been in a number of workshops, whether at the state level or national level, you've seen this quote before, where often we have an expectation that you set your claim first, but you can't do that in the type of writing students are doing, because they're having to make a decision on which position is best supported. So as they go through, they've got to look at what the data is telling them, or the evidence, because that is the information they can use then to set up that claim with that why or because that's included. So a couple of graphic organizers that you may want to take a look at for students. Some of you, I'm sure, have seen these as we go through. This particular one just basically lays out what's the question, your claim, your evidence, why, how does this connect, counterclaims, and then, of course, the summary. Very simple in looking at the basic elements that would be needed. Many of you who've been in GED workshops, you've seen both sides now. It is one that we quite heavily recommend for students, because it does set up where students can see the evidence side by side. And that allows for, 1, finding that evidence, the analysis, and 2, comparing that evidence, the evaluation, to then make that decision about the claim itself. So again, students need that structure. Students need a way that they can organize in order to do a better job with what they're writing. And that's one of those things, back to the very beginning when Daphne was talking about the fact that we're not seeing an organizational structure, or that the students are not taking that time to do that planning. So how are we going to help students? Daphne?
Is a brilliant part of the both sides now, is it forces students to look more objectively, and it actually helps support them in that, third person, objective stance with the material. The other methodology often used by students that you just made reference to, which is establishing a claim and then going to cherry pick for the evidence, doesn't come up to the standards set by this, where you can actually see all the evidence arrayed side by side, and it's easier to see what the stronger pieces are for each side in order to actually write about them in your actual response.
Definitely, that's an excellent point. And, you know, the thing that I also like about this particular Both Sides Now is that it's a guide for reading, so that students are focused in on looking for, you know, extracting that information from the text that they're reading, that they set a purpose. The purpose here is I'm reading this to see what the author has to say to support this, and then to actually pull those individual pieces. So I think, too, of this kind of as a reading guide, because many of our students, they're not as effective readers as we would like them to be. So this is another positive for them as they're working through this. So again, if you don't have a copy of the Both Sides Now, you'll find it in the resource guide. So just a couple more items here before we get over to the questions. We want our students to respond more effectively. So that means in part we have to educate ourselves. We have to spend some time with the sample responses that are in those resource guides. Our students need to see them as well. We need to have students see what the annotations say and help them more understand what the prompt really wants them to do. So the materials are all there. It's up to us to be able to push students in that direction. And I think when we got started, one of the things that's so important is practice, practice, practice. You know, as we go in, we have to explain. We've got to model as instructors what to do and how to go about the process. But also, students have to have that guided practice, and then they need to be able to work independently. Learning how to do effective extended responses is not a one-shot deal. It takes time in order to build those. So let's talk just a little bit more about proficient readers. Bonnie, can you talk a little bit about why the reading component is so important?
Yes, I can, Susan. This really is pretty much a recap of what we've talked about today. We know that proficient readers and writers, they do read complex text. So as we're working with our students in the classroom, we do need to ensure that we have complex text, not necessarily text that's just written at a high readability, but also text in different areas so that they can look at text structure, they can look at how it is organized. And as they're reading, we do know that proficient readers, they look for those keywords and phrases. As Susan talked to you a little bit about Both Sides Now, that's really using that type of graphic organizer forces students to interact with text. And that's really what we're looking at. They interact with text. They identify the evidence before they ever set that claim or argument. And there again, once they have found the evidence, proficient readers and writers, they analyze and evaluate it. So as we're going forward, we want to make sure that we have strategies in place that we continuously use to make sure that the strategy is there to help students closely read, identify evidence, use the evidence, and provide a rationale for why the argument was better supported. That connection piece between the evidence and the claim. So those really are the first steps. And you may say, but that doesn't give me enough in the classroom. So what we've provided for you are just a couple places to get started. In resources, there are many, many resources online that can be used. Procon.org, some great articles that do both sides. Susan and I and the rest of the crew on will just say, please make sure you read the articles before you give them to students. Some of them may be a little more controversial than you want to use, However, some great articles there. Newsella has some wonderful pro-con, and because on Newsella they're written at different lexile levels, you can use those articles for students at all types of reading levels. The Annenberg Classroom talks about different things in different areas, as well as the Digital Resource Library, which has some wonderful things on close reading, text-dependent questions, and how to engage in the writing process. But we've also referred to the aspect that there are some materials on GED testing service, and we're going to reference two webinars that we did in 2016. Both deal with a step-by-step process for helping your students craft constructed responses. We promise that if you integrate some of those routines into your classroom, modeling them, then having students work with you until, again, it becomes a part of themselves as a writer, they will do better on the writing process. Also included in those two webinars are many, many resources for you in the classroom to use throughout the workbooks. Susan also referenced the extended response resource guides, which are there. And do not forget that there are tutorials online for your students, not just for the structure of the test, but also how to write a constructed response. So those things are all available from GEDtestingservice.com. And having said that, Susan, I think we have quite a few questions.
I believe we do, and so we'll just start through, and we need to take a look back at some of the earlier questions that we had and see if we can't answer all of these to everybody's satisfaction. So, and you know what, Bonnie, this is one of those, this first one, the ER response, and we do hear quite a bit on my GED, the READY practice test. And no, the response is not scored. What you need to be aware of is that for teachers, the opportunity is there for you to do the scoring so that you're aware of what students are doing. There would be a significant cost factor if those responses were scored, but more importantly, it helps us as teachers know what students are doing, where their shortcomings may be, where their real advantages are as they're moving through. There may have some things where they have some real strengths. So keep that in mind. From Anna, we have, if students don't have at least 300 words, do they get a 0? No. That's just a general guideline, and we really don't want our students counting numbers. Bonnie and I remember back into the day when students would actually sit and count words.
Oh, yes.
But we do know that it's really important for our students to go through and that they have something of sufficient length that it can respond to that prompt. And that would be very challenging to do in a short paragraph, as we said.
Susan, also, let me just add to what you just said, is that if those 300 words are summarization, then they may have been well written, but they're going to likely get a 0 because that's not what the prompt asked for.
That's an excellent point. Thank you for bringing that in, because that is something that if they're summarizing, if they're quoting so much information that there's not a lot of original text, you can have 500 words, but it's not going to earn any points because it's not doing what the prompt is asking them to do. This is one from Kathy Hudson. Will GED testing service ever require points on the writing section in order to pass the RLA section? And I'll hand that off to Daphne.
Okay, so you may wonder why we didn't make the constructed response the gateway for saying you passed RLA. Well, let's take a look at the country as a whole, because this is a national testing program. And if we are going to set a standard for adult learners for high school equivalency, then you have to kind of look and see what's going on in high school. Currently, there are less than a handful of states that require the taking and passing of a writing test as a condition for graduating from high school. So we at GED Testing Service concluded that we could not hold adult learners to a higher standard than high school graduates are being held to. So in short, the answer is that it is what it is for right now, but I don't have a crystal ball, neither does anybody else at GED Testing Service, but certainly there is room in the future for us to reconsider that. But for right now and for the immediate future, there isn't a plan to make the constructive response the gate that determines whether you pass or fail the RLA exam.
Okay, thank you. The good point to know, and it's actually something I had not thought about, was that connection back to the high school programs and, you know, that requirement, you know, that maybe they all should, but then again, that's for each state to make a decision.
Well, but Susan, you know, the funniest thing about that is that a significant number of states who did have it as a requirement, at least within the last 5 or 6 years, backed away from that.
Okay, good to know. I guess they had some concerns there as well. So
I know, yes.
Yeah, definitely. Okay. I think, Bonnie, you answered the question regarding the counter argument.
I think so.
Okay. Because that particular one from Steve Schmidt, where you have a counter argument as a separate paragraph, which can or cannot be done.
Let me just talk a little bit to structure, though. We don't want students to be so aligned with a structure that the ideas don't drive the structure. And what I'm talking about is the 5-paragraph essay was such an artificial structure that we got into students who said, my first piece of evidence, my second piece of evidence, which is poor writing. So although we may want to strongly say, let's have 5 paragraphs here with an intro, evidence, counterclaim, and then conclusion. We don't want it to be so stringent that what happens is students say, my first piece of evidence is this, and it's connected here. And they have nothing more to write, so they write, for lack of better terms, gobbledygook. So we want to make sure that ideas drive structure, and they realize they can have 2 pieces of evidence in the same paragraph. If they connect, they can have a counterclaim again in a paragraph with evidence if it connects. That connection piece and that flow needs to be more important, where students understand they have a beginning, a middle, and an end.
Good point, because we don't want to fall into that trap. Fiona Clark made a comment about the example, the side-by-side examples. That's a really good way in order to do it. So I think that's going to be useful as they're working with within programs, is to go from that direction. Kimberly has asked, where exactly on the website is the poster? Daphne, can I ask you that one?
It's in the free resources section. It can be ordered from I think it's Print Hub. Let me see if I can bring it up on my computer so I can be a little bit more definitive about that.
Okay, thank you.
And I'll drop back in when I find it.
Okay, and then we have from Jane Perini, students come to us with writing fallacies, like a paragraph is 3 sentences, or there are 5 paragraphs to an essay. Taking them away from this thinking takes time and practice. And Jane, you're absolutely right. They do have these fallacies. They've had these things where there were certain rules that they had to follow, and if they didn't follow those, then the world, I guess, was going to stop turning on its axis. But these are the kinds of things that it does take a lot of time. It does take practice, but the end result really is worth it as they work through those. And so we have to be aware that, yes, Jane, you're right, it does take time, but it is time that's well spent as you move through. And
Susan, sorry. They in the educator section of the website, if you click for educators, there's a drop-down menu, and in the second column it says order free marketing materials. If you click there, you wind up on a page that's called About GED Print Hub, and you just sort of register and follow the instructions to get to the material.
Okay, and it's called Print Hub. Okay.
Yes, it's well, the menu on the menu, order free marketing materials is the selection that you need to make, and then if you click that, it takes you to a page that gets you that gives you a series of steps to get started getting those materials.
Okay, so I've just put a very quick thing. Now I'll put it into the chat box. So as you're going into the GED Testing Service website, and you're over there in the For Educators, you know, that little tab, we've talked about it many times, then go to Order Free Marketing Materials. Okay, and you'll register for Print Hub from there. And time permitting, we'll try to go back out there later. Good question from Brian. Could not writing a long enough response affect their score in the third trait? I've had a number of students who've demonstrated very good command of conventions get zeros in that trait. I doubt that they're forgetting basic sentence structure when they're testing. Could it be that they're not writing enough for the computer to accurately assess their conventions? Brian, that could be very well what happens. The other thing that happens is many times we have students who, for lack of a better phrase, really don't know how to paraphrase. They don't know how to go back and use the information they've learned, so they take it straight from the source text. As a result, they don't have enough original text that it can truly be assessed for those conventions. So we see that, unfortunately, too often as we're working with our students. So they need to make sure that they've got adequate information and that they're not cherry picking a lot of information out of the source text and using that directly. Mary Babcock, I've been told that higher scoring, 165 plus students, are the ones more likely to score on the extended response. Actually, they're reaching those scores because they're doing a good job on their extended response. The student, that's the reality. It's not that students at that level do this. It's that students who have these skills can score at those levels. So we have to keep that in mind. Are these resources in Spanish also? If you take a look, the resource guide that Bonnie mentioned earlier, yes, that is in Spanish for the taxation one, for the daylight savings time. Also, as you look over at like Newsela, they have quite a few things that are there in Spanish as well. So some of the materials, yes, there are some resources that are available. Okay. Let's look at Brian again. I had a student who failed the test 3 times with a 144 and zeros across the board. On his 4th test, he typed his response and then copied and pasted it below so that he had the response twice. He went through and deleted a lot of the punctuation in the second copy, but left the original the same. Oh my. Daphne, I'll have to turn that one over to you about what would happen with having that second copy in there.
I would have to actually go to the assessment services folks to get a definitive answer on that. Off the top of my head, I could not answer that.
Is there a way that we can get back to Brian with an answer then from Assessment Services?
Is my or Debbie's, well, you can actually tell Brian, if you could send an email to communications@gedtestingservice.com, they will route it to me.
Okay, that sounds good. And then we're going to go over to the GED Testing Service website in just a few minutes so we can make sure that people are aware. Jeanette, so hold on to your response, your question there. I'm always in search of varied prompts. Is there a good source for prompts? Juliet, if you have not had an opportunity to use the practice prompts that are on the GED Testing Service website, there are some for classroom practice. You're going to need to do that. So we'll go take a look at those as well.
And Susan, let me just also say, by using a pro-con or a two-side of an argument article from Newsella, if you look at the way prompts are written, they're very, very easy to write so that students can read some of those articles and they have the prompt right there. So they really are easy to craft if you'll just follow the process that GED Testing Services used.
Bonnie, I also want to offer, reinforce actually something that you said earlier. You know, what I can pretty much guarantee you is that students will not see controversial topics covered in the extended response. And so even though there may be a temptation on your part to engage students by hitting a controversial topic, students will not see those kinds of things on the GED test. So, you know, pick balanced arguments. One of the things that also you should know in terms of setting up an extended response practice is that in service to the idea that students can take either position, that there's no quote-unquote right choice, the arguments that they're going to see on the operational test will be awfully close in terms of the weighting and the kind of evidence that is marshaled to support each one. You should try for the same kind of thing when you're using practice material.
Okay, and what I will say, Alan Black has a fairly complicated question. Alan, I'm going to ask if you can forward that on to Daphne so that, because this involves students who only complete a portion of the passage and they don't get their entire response written. So I'm going to ask if you'll forward that on, and we'll keep all these questions as well as we're going through. Jennifer Roeder has a question. I have a student with a 4th grade reading level. Where should I start? Bonnie, you want to take that one on?
We start at the very beginning. It's a very good place to start.
I didn't know you were going to sing it, but that's okay.
At a 4.0, at a 4.0, there are going to be a lot of skills that you'll need to teach, as you well know, before a student gets to the GED testing service level. If you're talking about constructed responses, first start with something that's very simple and real world. Susan and I have started with something as simple as an opinion piece such as, which grocery store do you like best? Give me the reason why and tell me how you know. So things like, I like this grocery store best because it's always so clean. Well, how do you know it's so clean? Because the aisles are spotless, because this. That gets them started understanding evidence and connection pieces. From there, and again, all they have to do is identify those kinds of things. From there, I could take them to a pro-con article, or actually a Newsella article that's pro-con. and do it at their Lexile reading level, because again, those articles are free for your use. So I may find an article that's written at a 4050, and I could have them actually use both sides now, where they're identifying the evidence for, the evidence from the other side for, and that they say, this side I think is better supported because. And that's as far as I go. From there, I can take both sides now and have them write a short paragraph with the first sentence being, this side is better supported because, and give me the reason, give me a piece of evidence, and then a conclusion sentence. Those would be very much a step-by-step of writing, taking them from real world to article that is nonfiction, from a graphic organizer to something such as a paragraph writing sample. With close reading, again, you need to set up one or two strategies to have them interact with text, that they circle or they highlight in one color the evidence that supports one side, that they highlight or circle the evidence for the other side, something that they interact with text. All of those are beginning skills prior to really getting to the level of GED writing. But as Susan and I have talked as we've done workshops at the adult basic ed level, those are also the skills that GED teachers would be thrilled if they had students who could, quote, do that much. So just some beginning levels, but there again, if there's some specific things that you'd like to know, please again email to it, because Daphne and Debbie will make sure it comes to the right folks. But that's where I would start with constructive response writing, from things that I know about to then reading short nonfiction articles, but really graphic organizers first before you ever get into writing a full-blown text.
And Bonnie, we have so many different, and thank you first for responding to that, but we have so many different responses on here in terms of, and requests for where different resources are, that I wanted to bring people over to the GED Testing Service website. So if you'll hold on for just a second, I'm going to get us over to...
As Susan gets onto the website, there'll be two things that she'll take you to. One, I'm just going to point out, and that is the in-session newsletter. If you've not signed up for the in-session newsletter, I want you to go back to your desk after this webinar is over and sign up for it. The other thing she'll show you is one location where you can get so many educator resources. And just realize it is not a static website. Things continue to get added. So those are great things. So Susan, you have it up there. Yay!
Yes, it just took a minute moving from one thing to another. So just so that everybody's aware, when you're taking a look across the pages here, you have programs and services. That's the first tab, and there's a lot of information included within that, accommodations, all of those. There's another that deals with different issues. And then you come to for educators. And Daphne, a few minutes ago, talked about order-free marketing materials. And that's under the tab for educators. And as I go over to that, what it wants me to do is it wants me to do a registration and sign in. And so I'll need to visit the GED Print Hub so I can set up, register and create an account, and then I can order some of the free materials that are there. You can see I don't have one set up, so but that is something that you're going to want to do. But again, where did we start? We came over from the For Educators tab down to order free marketing materials. Now, the other thing that we've all been talking about is the classroom resources. And so if I just continue down that menu, I see that. Now, as I scroll down the page, let me get under Reasoning Through Language Arts. Bonnie mentioned the tutorials here in English and in Spanish. Download them, or you can view them online. item samplers, English and Spanish, extended response answer guidelines. You can also get it in Spanish. And then we have the scoring tools that are included there. But take a look at, I want to show you this one especially because several people made mention that they wanted some prompts and passages that they could use in the classroom. So GED Testing Service has been kind enough to give us the materials that we can use. So we have 5 different sets of materials. Notice that what we have is we have 2 reading passage, and each passage takes, one will take the positive, one will take the negative, and then the student has to decide which is the better supported. And so, you know, that's the setup throughout as they're working with those. And then,
now, Susan, I was going to say one thing, there may be on some tests one passage that has 2 sides of an argument.
There could be. So they just need to be aware of that.
Yes.
Also, we do have the GED, a place where you can get the GED Ready, extended responses, the prompts, and the source text. Again, this is for you to work with, and it's an agreement that you're not going to be using this to teach. This is about working with students as they're going through the materials. And let me come back over here. And constructive response, resource guides, and scoring tools. And you can see here we have this first one deals with the daylight saving time issue, and it's a little slow to load. I know. It's a little slow to load here, so just be patient with this particular one. But I wanted to show you what we have within these. See all these different anchor responses? Those are student responses that have been scored, and there's an explanation for each of these. So as I move down, and I don't want to make anybody dizzy, but okay, sorry about that. Let me get over to, here's an example. So here is a response. Here's an annotation. It also tells you what the student earned on trait 1, then there's trait 2, trait 3. So for me as an instructor, this was just incredibly important information to have at my fingertips so I could get an understanding by seeing something and really beginning to understand it based on the comments that have been made within the annotations. And the other one is taxation and revenue that is listed right here. So keep those things in mind. Is there somewhere else I need to go within this, Bonnie, that you can think of at this point?
I think that pretty much gives them the basic information. Just one comment, because a question comment was made right now. For this upcoming year, 2018, there is only a constructed response, an extended one in RLA. The 2 short answers for the science test will not be there for 2018. However, you will notice that all of the materials on short answers will continue to be on the GED Testing Service website, because although we will not see a short answer on 2018, it does not say we will not see short answers in the future.
Okay. So some additional questions that we have. Let's see. Is there an automatic word count under tools? And I'm assuming that we're looking at on the test, and there is not a word count.
No.
So make sure that yes, there's a nice little word count in Word, but there is not for this. Will it be possible to view this again at another time? Salvador, thank you very much for asking that question, because yes, you will. You'll be able to view this. It'll be posted within the next couple of days, and along with all the materials that are here. So make sure that you go over and you visit. In fact, I'll show you right now. Let me pull this away. Under For Educators, if you go to Professional Development, you can access it through there, or you can slide right down to Webinars. And Webinars, you will see there's the webinar slides. You can watch the show. There's even a certificate of completion once you've done that, and also the workbook that's included. So this particular one will be posted in the next few days. Okay. I'm so glad the question was asked because I think I would have forgotten to mention that. Okay, James Gordon had a comment or a question. Is either side of the argument right as long as the writer supports the claim of which article is better supported? That's correct. Students can choose either one. You just have to back it up with the evidence. That's why we have that students who will swear to you that there's only a right answer. But no, either one of those can be argued.
Yes, and that's why the practice work that you give students should actually reflect the ability for them to, there should be no practice material that heavily weights one argument as being vastly superior over another one. Because if your students come to the operational test looking for that, they won't find it. They'll find a lot of gray. And really, I think that too much time on the student's part gets caught up in trying to figure out, you know, well, are they trying to pull a game on me? And there really is a right answer. It was in one of the urban legends we mentioned at the front end. There isn't, there isn't a right answer. There's only good writing, and that's ultimately what we want students to be able to do.
Absolutely. And then we have a question. I don't know exactly if the word is submit, but when the student finishes writing their test, there is something that they have to indicate, a button they have to hit in order for it to be completed. Correct,
Yes.
Daphne? Okay.
That is correct.
Is it called submit or is it something else?
I believe it is. It's called submit, but we can double check that.
Okay, thank you. Jean has left, but I have to say, Bonnie, and we know Jean very well, she does a lot of work in corrections. If they, being students, can spend hours analyzing and evaluating their sports teams, they have no excuse for not being able to write, analyze, and evaluate an issue. And you have to love that because that is such a good way to respond to all of these.
Yeah.
Then we have from April, how can we as teachers check a student's score on the extended response on the GED Language Arts Ready test? There is a number of different resources for you to go through. There's a scoring tool that's included under that classroom. That is something that you need to score. Rather, it is not, the Ready test is not scored by the artificial intelligence, the automated scoring machine. Okay, and then Jeanette made a comment about that they have a postage and handling fee for the free items. I don't know.
Yes, they do.
Yes, you have. We do not charge for the items themselves, but you do have to pay the postage and handling.
Okay, and Nicole says the RLA posters are not currently available.
Okay, well, I think that this is, understand we had a really busy fall conference season. We were at, multiple venues over the months since from August until just a couple of weeks ago. We are probably, I know that the intention is to reprint things, so please bear with us. We got decimated by the many conferences that we went to this fall.
The certificate information, if I'm not incorrect about this, that will be that they can download the certificate once this is posted online. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, so that will be coming. And Fiona, we want to say you're very welcome. We're very pleased to be able to provide the webinars for adult educators, and we're glad to see that people have found these to be really useful. And no, there is no extended response on social studies. So let's see if we have, oh, let me do one more thing. Bonnie, if you can just take a look at some of the remaining questions, I will pull up the resource guide for just a quick viewing before we close it out.
And I am looking away.
Okay. Okay, that should now be up so that you can see it. This is the resource guide that you have. I'll pull the control panel out of the way. And what you see here is that you have a number of different resources available. Some of the things that Bonnie covered as you went through, interacting with the text, the sample text for the taxation revenue, a sample extended response, along with its annotations, and those quick tips. And we highly recommend that you provide this copy to students, the extended response answer guidelines. Make sure they know that, and they can't tell you, well, I didn't know that was the way I needed to do things. Here is a copy of both sides now that you can copy and use in the classroom. And Bonnie mentioned a number of different resources that are available here for you as well.
One other question I don't think we quite answered from Cynthia. Constructive response is just a phrase that's used because they construct a response based upon what they've read. And there can either be an extended or a short type of response, extended being what RLA does. The constructed response for GED testing service is argumentative as well, because there again, you're determining which side is better supported. So constructed response is the big umbrella, and then underneath it is either extended response or short answer. There again, referring to an essay type that is identified with writing about what you've read. So hopefully that clarifies. Sometimes we use a lot of terminology in education and we forget to just kind of go back and set the ground rules.
Okay, and any other, because I do know that we are a few minutes past 5. So we have had marvelous questions from everybody. We are so pleased that, number one, 265 of you have hung in there with us past 5 o'clock. But we're so pleased with all the different things that you have asked. And as we've moved through all of these, let's see, we've answered. I'm trying to see if there's any other questions that we need to answer.
I believe, except for the aspect that, yes, we do know the rubric is a very complex item. If you can use it a number of times, you will find that you do internalize what that rubric does. So bite the bullet, use the rubric till you get comfortable with what it says, and I promise you it will be a very usable scoring tool, and you won't need to use it forever.
Yeah.
We
estimate that if you use it on average, we think 5 to 7 times. Once you've used it 5 to 7 times, you except for responses that are all over the map, where you might need the discipline of looking at each subcategory, you probably won't need it. Bonnie is absolutely correct.
Well, Susan, what's coming in 2018?
Well, we'll have some more webinars.
Yes, so is this a stay tuned for February 2018?
Absolutely. It is a stay tuned, and we will be putting out information about upcoming webinars. We try to do webinars every other month, but we'll get a schedule out so that everyone will know about that. And also, just a little word to each of you that we will be having the GED conference. Will be in San Diego in July. There will be a PD track that people may want to participate in, as well as a train the trainer track. So lots of different things that are going on as we get started into the new year. And one more item. If you make sure that you are signed up for In Session, the newsletter, so that you can stay abreast of everything that is going on and all the great information. Plus, you often hear there the very first response is when they say, we're going to have a sale on GED Ready. So keep that in mind as you're going through, and make sure you, on the GED Testing Service website, that you go to subscribe to emails, and you'll be signed up for In Session. So having said that, Daphne, any last words of advice for everybody?
Well, I just wanted to make sure that you've done all the, you completely stole my thunder on In Session, but I do want to remind people who may have been new to the webinar today that we have a complete webinar archive. We've covered every single content area a couple of times over, and all of the webinars are out on the GED Testing Service website. So if you need a little bit more material on constructive response, we've got that. You want to see where we've been with mathematical reasoning, which we did earlier this year, it's out there. So please take advantage of the resources, because not only is the webinar recording out there, the PowerPoint and the resource guides. It's a very useful resource for you. And with that, I'd like to wish everybody happy holidays.
Absolutely. Happy holidays to everyone. I know everybody is ready for a much-needed break as you're coming in. And as we said earlier, stay tuned for 2018. We'll have more information coming out about future webinars, and continue doing what you do best, and that is getting those students ready for the GED test and on into their futures. Last words, Bonnie?
Be safe, everyone. Have a wonderful holiday season, and we will see you in 2018.
Thank you.
Thank you.